I am writing this because the sifting house requires a statement and because my hands still work. I am told the statement will be sealed the hour it is finished, and that no Adren now living will read it. I am told this is a mercy. I have stopped arguing with the words they use. My name was Yenner Ashal. I was a hull diver out of Thesabite for 41 years, and a salvage master for 19 of those, and I was not a curious man. Curiosity is a young diver's disease, and it kills them in the first decade. When they cut a bulkhead they should have left welded and let the cold in on themselves. I lived because I was dull. I want that written down. Whatever else is put in this file about me, let it say that I was a dull man who took a contract. Every chart in Adren space carries the gray quarter. You have seen it. You have seen it since you were a hatchling in a reading hall tracing lanes with your finger. There is the bright arm with our world strung along it, and there is the Tulvani Reach and the broker lanes down through Surith space where the freight goes, and then out past the Andremer shelf the ink simply stops being ink and becomes a flat gray field with no names in it. No stars marked. No hazards. No legend. Nothing at the border to tell you why. Just gray, the way a chartwright shades a place he has been told to shade. I asked once when I was young enough to ask. The chart master at Thesabite was an old woman with a milk eye, and she said what all of them say, which is that the gray is not a hazard and not a nation and not a nothing, and that the difference between those three has never been settled, and that she would thank me to move along. When I pressed her, I was 17. I had a diver's arrogance and no scars yet to season it. She put her thumb over the gray and said the thing I have heard from every Adren who has ever been made to speak of it. Nobody keeps anything in there. I thought she meant the place was barren, stripped. No ore, no water, no ports, no reason. I carried that meaning for 40 years the way you carry a coin in a coat you never wear. I want to explain the unwitnessed hour now, before the rest of it, because if you are reading this and you are not Adren, and I have been told nobody will read this, and I no longer believe anything I am told, then nothing that follows will land. We are a species that sees very well. Our eyes take in more light than we can bear, and so we grew a second membrane, and every Adren child learns before speech to draw that membrane down. Shut-eye, we call it. Half our language is built on it. To shut-eye on a friend's shame is the highest courtesy we have. To stand open before someone is either love or violence, and the grammar is nearly the same. And once in every rotation at the hour when Thessa's sun sits lowest, every Adren alive stops. Recorders go dark, windows silver. Cameras in the freight yards are pulled from their mounts and laid face down on the concrete, because a covered lens is not enough and never has been. For 1 hour nothing is watched and nothing is kept. Not the speaker of the conquered, not the prisoner in the marrow cells. Not the surgeon with her hands inside a chest she works, but no one records the working, and if she fails, no one will ever be able to prove she failed. We do not do this for privacy. Privacy is a lawyer's word, a small word, a word about property. We do it because we learned 4,000 years ago, and at a cost this file is too short to hold, that a person who is always kept becomes a performance of a person, and that a civilization of performances is a beautiful thing which cannot bear one honest hour and therefore does not survive one. The unwitnessed hour is not a right. It is a load-bearing wall. It is the reason there is an Adren conquered at all instead of 900 million actors starving in a hall of mirrors. I say all of this flatly. It is the sort of thing an Adren is not supposed to have to say, the way you are not supposed to have to explain the floor. Understand that when I tell you what is in the gray, you will need the floor. The contract came to me through Holden Prass, who was a broker's man and a liar in the ordinary way, and who is dead now, though not in any manner that will interest you. He came aboard the Marrow Tithe at Andremer shelf with a slate and a bad cough, and told me there was a Tulvani deep hauler called the Asenrith sitting 3 degrees inside the gray with her holds full of unrefined Kalalloy, and that the Tulvani had written her off 206 years ago, and that a write-off is a gift with a lock on it. I told him no. He said the word gray had never once been defined in Concord law. He said the shading on the charts was a courtesy of Chartrites, not a statute. He said no Adren vessel had ever been fined, boarded, or sanctioned for crossing, because there was no law to fine them under, and he said this with the particular satisfaction of a man who has read one document very carefully and no others. I told him no again. Then he told me what the alloy was worth at Surith prices with the Tulvani mines flooded, and I wanted on the record that I did not say yes on the spot, and I wanted on the record that this distinction is worth nothing at all, because I said yes 4 days later. My mate was Oran Mesk, who had dived with me since we were both young and stupid, and who was the only one of us with sense enough to be afraid before there was anything to be afraid of. He read the chart and he said, "Yenner, why gray and not red? Red is a hazard. Red is a thing the Chartrites understand. Red says radiation, gravity shear, a nest of raiders, a star that throws. Red is a warning, and a warning is a kindness because it implies someone came back to give it." Gray says nothing. Oran said, "A Chartrite who does not know what is out there writes unsurveyed. A Chartrite who knows and cannot say, writes gray." He said it the way a man tells you the shape of a hole in the ground and asks you to guess what made it. I told him it was 206 years and a dead Tulvani hauler and 11 days of flying. He came anyway. He came because I went. I have had a long time to sit with that. We took Tavro Delane, a cutter, 19 years old, who had never dived outside the shelf and who spent the outbound weeks polishing his torch heads and asking Oran about the gray until Oran stopped answering. And we took Sivedon on the engines, who was 60 and silent and who had buried 2 crews in her life and who did not ask about the gray once, which I noticed at the time and did not weigh. 4 of us in Prass, 5 aboard the Marrow Tithe. We crossed on a 4th day, in the middle of the ship's watch, and I will tell you exactly what happened when we crossed, because everyone who hears this story leans forward here and everyone is disappointed. Nothing happened. There was no line. There is no line. Space does not honor ink. We ran the shelf beacons out to their last echo, and then we ran on into the gray with the drives cold and the hull ticking as it cooled, and the stars did not change, because stars do not care what a Chartrite shades. Tavro stood at the forward glass for 11 hours waiting for something to come out of the dark at us. Nothing came. By the 3rd day inside, he was laughing. By the 5th, so was Prass. There is a particular laughter men make when a thing they were told to fear has failed to appear, and it is not a good sound, and I did not stop it because I was making it too. On the 6th day inside the gray, we passed a station. I want to be careful here. The Sifting House readers have been careful with me about this, and I will be careful in turn, because the readers say my memory is doing things, and perhaps it is. It was small, smaller than an Adren waypoint. A gray drum, spun for weight, hung on a rock the size of a market square. Old, the rock had been machined a long time ago, and the machining had gone soft under dust. Standard, unremarkable. The kind of thing our own people leave scattered down a lane and forget to charge anyone for. Every light on it was burning. Not signal lamps, not beacons, room lights, interior lights. Behind hundreds of little square windows, warm and yellow and steady, the lights of a place where somebody works, and the docking throat stood open, not blown open, not sheared. Open, with the seal lip clean, the way a door is open when someone has gone out and does not intend to be long. Oran put the long glass on it for an hour, and then handed it to me without a word. There was no one aboard, no heat that wasn't the fixtures, no traffic, no response on any band we had, no challenge, no warning, no automated hail. A little station with its doors open and its lights on and nobody home, 200 years or 2,000 years out here, burning power to light empty rooms. Tavro said they left in a hurry. Sivet said that is not a station that was left in a hurry. That is a station that was left. And Prass said the thing that I have thought about every hour since, and he said it as a joke, and his voice was very high. Maybe they're coming back. We did not stop. I want that in the file. I gave the order and we did not stop, and I have wondered whether that order was mine or whether it was made for me somewhere behind my sternum where the old animal lives, the one that knows an open door is not an invitation. We passed 4 more before we reached the Asenrith, all lit, all open. Nobody keeps anything in there. I found her on the 11th day, tumbling slow around a dead brown giant with 3 moons, and no name on any chart of ours. The Asenrith was a Tulvani deep hauler of the old wide-keel type, 900 meters of spine and rib with the ore drums slung underneath her like eggs, and she was intact. That was the first wrong thing, and I logged it as a right thing, because greed reads every fact in its own favor. 206 years is long enough for a hull to be found, long enough for a hull to be stripped by whoever passes. Her drums were full. Her drives were cold and whole. Her outer plate was not scarred. There was no weapon work on her anywhere, and I looked with a diver's eye, and I have cut apart 100 ships that men killed, and there was nothing. She had simply stopped. We put the marrow tithe on her flank, and I took Oran and Tavro across on a line, while Sivit held the engines warm and Prass sat in the cabin with his slate and his numbers. The lights were on inside the Asenrith. 206 years, and her interior lighting was live, and her air was live, and it was cold, but it was breathable, and it was moving. Tavro's faceplate fogged, and he laughed, and Oran turned around and struck him across the helmet with the flat of his hand, and Tavro did not laugh again. We went up her spine to the bridge. The Tulvani build their corridors round and their bridges high, and we went in a diver's line, hand to shoulder, and there was dust everywhere, but it lay flat and even, and nothing had disturbed it in 2 centuries but the movement of the air. There were no bodies. There were coats on the backs of chairs. There was a game half played on a console with the pieces set out in a Tulvani gambit that Oran said he recognized. There was a cup, and the residue in the cup had dried to a lacquer and cracked. There was a boot on its side under a station as if someone had kicked it off to rub a foot. There were no bodies, and no blast marks, and no sign that anyone on the Asenrith had ever been afraid. On the command board in the exact center, on a clean square of steel where the dust did not lie, there was a small gray box. It was about the length of my forearm, rectangular. The corners were softened. The material was not metal and not ceramic, and my glove could not tell me what it was. There was one hairline seam around its middle. There was no writing on it in any script I have seen. There was no dust on it, and there was no dust on the steel beneath it, and there was dust 3 fingers deep on everything else in that room, and the Asenrith had been dead since before my grandmother was hatched. Oran said, "Put it down." I had not picked it up. I want to be precise about that, because the readers at Omber Fall asked me 9 separate times in 9 separate ways, and I gave the same answer each time, and they did not like it. I had not touched it. I was standing 1.5 meters back from the board with my hands at my sides, and Oran said, "Put it down," and then he heard himself say it, and I watched a man I had known for 40 years go very still inside a suit. It had been placed. That is the whole of it. That is the thing I could not explain to Prass, who wanted the alloy, and could not explain to the Concord's men, who wanted a threat they could measure. Nobody had dropped it. Nobody had left it behind in a hurry. It was set down in the center of a dead ship's command board, square to the edges, dead center, on the one surface in that room that had been wiped clean first. Set down the way you set a note on a table for someone who is out, so that they will see it when they come in and will know it was meant for them, and not for anyone else. Somebody had come aboard the Asenrith after the Tulvani had stopped. Somebody had walked her corridors. Somebody had chosen that spot because it was the spot a salvage master would look at first, because a salvage master always looks at the command board first. Every species, every century, it is the only universal thing in this profession. And then that somebody had gone away and left the lights on. Tavro took it. 19 years old, with a torch on his hip, he never used once on that ship, and he stepped past me and picked it up before either of us could put a hand on him, and he held it up and turned it in the light and said, "It's not even heavy." We were clear of the Osenrith in 40 minutes. We did not take the alloy. Prass screamed at me for 2 days about the alloy until Oren told him, quietly in the galley, that if he said the word alloy again, Oren would put him out of the lock in his shirt, and Prass believed him, and there was silence after that. Nothing followed us out of the gray. I need you to sit with that. I need whoever seals this file to sit with it for 1 full minute before they turn the page, because it is the load-bearing beam of everything that comes after, and every version of this story that gets told in a dockside hall gets it wrong. Nothing followed us. No fleet rose. No lance took our drives. No voice came over any band. We ran 11 days out through the gray with every man aboard sleeping in his suit and Sivert sitting at the engine board with her hand on the emergency purge, and we passed 3 more little stations with their lights burning and their doors open, and not one of them so much as swept us. We crossed back over the line that is not a line, and the Andremer shelf beacons came up one by one on the board like the lamps of a town, and Tavro wept in the corridor with his hands over his face, and I told him it was over. I was the master of that vessel. It was my place to know things, and I did not know anything at all. You have heard all your life that no one returns from human space. I am the proof that this is a lie, and I have spent 11 months in a white room at Anber Fall learning that the lie was told by people who loved us. The sifting house at Anber Fall is a watchpost on the gray edge that no Adren is taught about, staffed by conquered readers who are recruited from the deaf orders and who go into that station once and do not come out again. And I did not know it existed until the marrow tithe was taken under tow 10 hours after we recrossed the shelf. They did not board us with guns. That surprised me at the time. 6 of them came across in soft suits with no visible arms, and their leader was a woman named Prel Atin who wore a vessel warden's braid and who came onto my bridge and looked at my crew, one face at a time, without hurry, the way a physician looks. And when she came to Tavro Delane, who had the gray box in his kit bag under his bunk, she stopped. She had not asked us anything. Nobody had told her anything. There was nothing on our hull. She said, "Which of you carried it out?" Not did you find something. Not what did you take. She knew the shape of the answer before she came aboard, the way a plague warden knows the shape of a cough, and she had a room ready for it at Anber Fall, and that room, I learned later, had been built and staffed and swept and heated and lit, and had stood empty for 211 years. They put us in quarantine, and it was not for disease. Prel Atin explained nothing for 9 days. On the 10th she came to my cell with an old woman called Adher 10, and Adher 10 was blind, not shut-eyed blind, the sockets clean and closed over with the pale seam of a surgical faith, and Prel Atin set a chair down and sat in it and asked me to describe, from the beginning, without omission, everything my crew had done and said from the hour we crossed the gray. I did. It took 3 days. I'm a dull man and I am thorough. When I had finished, Adher 10 spoke for the first time. She said, "He has left out the hours." I said that I had left out nothing. She said, "Master, a shawl. 11 days in and 11 days out and the days before the crossing. That is more than 30 unwitnessed hours. You have not described one of them and you cannot, and it would be an obscenity if you could. And you have therefore described your crossing with a hole in it 30 hours wide." And Prel Atin said, very gently, in the voice you use on a man whose leg is off and who has not yet looked down, "Master Ashal, they have not. They opened the box on the 90th day, in a sealed hall under the sifting house, with 4 readers and no recorders and the whole station's power rooted away, and I was made to sit in the hall because their law says a witness must witness. Oren was made to sit. Sivert was made to sit. Prass had already gone into the wall of his cell by then, and there was nothing left in him to bring. Tavro Delane was 19 years old. The box has 1 seam and no catch, and at her 10 put her thumbs on it, and it opened for her the way a cupboard opens for anyone. And I understood in that moment that it had never been locked, and that this was the cruelest thing about it, and that whoever made it had understood that too. It was full of light, not a projection, not a screen. The hall simply had another room in it, and the other room was the bridge of the Asenrith, at some hour 206 years gone, with 11 Tulvani in it and every one of them alive. We watched the Asenrith die for 6 days. Not by violence, by nothing. Her master, a Tulvani named Vesek Rull, whose name I know as well as I know my own mother's, took her 3 degrees into the gray on a contract very like mine, and nothing came for them either. And I watched 11 people spend 9 weeks going quietly and completely to pieces in a lit ship with the doors open, in a place where no one keeps anything. And I watched them talk to each other in the dark hours of their watch. And I watched what they did when they believed the watch was theirs alone. The box had it all, every hour, every private hour, not from a camera in a corner, from everywhere. From inside the cabins the Tulvani had sealed, from the head. From the 2 hours when Vesek Rull sat alone in the ore gallery and said things about his own crew into the dark that no living thing was meant to hear, and that I now cannot unhear, and that I could repeat to you word for word this evening. The box did not judge any of it. There was no commentary. There was no voice. It simply held everything the Asenrith had been, whole and unedited and without mercy and without malice, the way a stone holds its weight. And on the 4th day of the watching, at her 10, who could not see it, who only heard it, who sat with her ruined face turned up and her hands flat on her knees for 6 days without once asking for water, said the thing that finished us. She said, "Where are the humans?" Because there were none, not one. In 206 years of the Asenrith's keeping, in every hour of every one of those 11 Tulvani lives in the corridors and the cabins and the ore gallery and the long silent tumble around a brown giant with 3 unnamed moons. No human ever appeared. No ship came. No voice hailed. Nobody boarded her while she was warm. The Tulvani were never threatened, never approached, never harmed, never spoken to. They were only kept. And when they were finished, when they had come apart entirely, in a manner I will not set down here, and when the last of them had stopped, then somebody walked aboard in the dark, long after, and cleaned 1 square of steel on the command board with what looked like the sleeve of a coat, and set the box down square to the edges, and left the lights on, and went away.